Okay, so picture this.
Right.
It's election night. The tension is so thick, you could cut it with a butter knife.
Right.
And everyone's glued to the TV, waiting for those results to start trickling in.
Absolutely.
We've all been there, right?
It's more than just the spectator sport, though. Elections have this way of capturing our collective imagination, you know?
Absolutely. And you know what's even wilder than watching those electoral maps light up?
What's that?
Someone, somewhere,
Yeah.
probably already knows how it's going to turn out.
Right. Yeah.
That's where our deep dive topic comes in.
Okay.
You sent us this fascinating article about Allan Lichtman, this history professor who's built like a whole career
I know him, yeah.
on predicting U.S. presidential elections with almost unbelievable accuracy.
It is pretty remarkable.
It's crazy, right?
What's remarkable is that he's not
he's
not relying on some secret polling data or insider information or anything like that.
Right.
He's using a model. He calls them keys. A set of 13 keys to analyze elections going back decades.
And hold on to your hats, because this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Since the 1980s, his model has correctly predicted every single presidential election.
It's really incredible.
Except one.
Yeah, except one.
You know that slight hiccup in 2000?
Right, the one everyone likes to bring up.
Of course, of course.
And even with that outlier, the accuracy of his track record is astounding.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what he's unlocked that the rest of us haven't.
So how does he do it? Are these keys some kind of mystical code passed down through generations of, like, political analysts?
Not quite. They're a blend of objective factors like the state of the economy, which we all know plays a huge role in elections, and more subjective elements like social unrest. And what I find so fascinating is that Lichtman, who's a history professor, teamed up with a seismologist to develop this model.
Okay, a history buff and an earthquake scientist walk into a bar. No, seriously, that's a wild pairing.
An unlikely duo.
What does studying seismic activity have to do with predicting elections?
Well, I think it speaks to the intricate web of factors that influence something as complex as a national election.
Yeah.
It's not just about crunching numbers. It's about understanding the underlying currents of history, economics, and even, dare I say, national mood.
So, now that we understand a bit about Lichtman's background, let's dive into the heart of his model, the 13 keys.
Let's do it.
Are you ready to unlock the secrets of election prediction? 13 keys, huh?
13 keys.
Sounds kind of like something out of like a Dan Brown novel.
Right.
Where do we even begin?
So imagine these keys as a series of yes or no questions about the political landscape leading up to an election. And it's not about, predicting the future in a mystical sense or anything like that, but rather analyzing historical patterns to see if the present situation aligns with past victories or defeats for the incumbent party.
Okay, so it makes it feel a bit less like a magic trick and more like, oh, we're like, detectives on a case.
Exactly.
Give us an example of one of these keys.
Okay, so let's take the economy, for example.
Okay.
Lichtman doesn't just look at broad trends. He dives into specifics.
Okay.
One of the key questions is whether the economy is in recession during the election year.
Interesting.
Another is whether there's been significant short-term economic growth.
So it's not just about how people, like, feel good or bad about the economy.
Right.
But whether the numbers back that feeling up.
Precisely. It's about removing that sort of the emotional aspect of it. And looking at
the hard data.
The hard data.
Right. But it's not all about spreadsheets and economic indicators.
Sure.
We mentioned that social unrest key.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to quantify something as, fluid as that?
Well, I mean, it's not about, measuring feelings or anything like that. But looking at concrete events.
Okay.
Lichtman has specific criteria for what constitutes significant social unrest.
Okay.
Like major protests or riots that capture national attention.
Give me an example.
Think back to the civil rights movement.
Okay.
Vietnam War protests, or even the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Right.
These weren't just isolated incidents.
Right.
They reflected a deeper kind of sense of discontent within society.
So it's like taking the pulse of the nation, right? Like, is there a groundswell of unrest that could signal, a desire for change at the top?
And while it might seem subjective, having these very clearly defined criteria helps bring a level of objectivity to the analysis, right? It's not just about gut feelings. It's about looking at the historical patterns and seeing if the current situation aligns with past periods of upheaval that corresponded with changes in the presidency.
Okay, but any model that makes like these kinds of bold claims, is bound to attract some critics.
Sure.
Some people say that his model is biased towards Democrats, given their, recent track record.
Right.
What do you make of that? I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
His model has predicted more Democratic victories in recent decades.
Right.
But is that because the model itself is biased?
Right.
Or is it just a reflection of, the political realities of the time?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, it's tempting to, look for bias.
Sure.
When a model seems to favor one side or the other.
Right.
But we have to remember that, Lichtman isn't trying to predict who should win. Right. He's trying to say who's most likely to win based on these historical patterns.
Okay.
So if his keys align more often with the party that's been winning, it might just mean that, they've been better at navigating those key factors.
It's kind of like saying a weather forecasting model is biased towards rain just because it's been a particularly wet decade,
Exactly.
Right? Like, it doesn't mean it's wrong.
Right. It doesn't mean the model's flawless. Right.
Right.
It's still based on interpretations of history. And history, as we know, often written by the victors.
And speaking of interpretations, Lichtman's 2024 prediction.
Yes.
Definitely made some headlines, According to this article, he is predicting a Harris victory.
Interesting.
Which, of course, sent some people cheering.
Of course.
And others scrambling for their, nearest panic room.
Right.
But we have to remember, these predictions aren't endorsements.
Right. Exactly.
He's not saying who he wants to win.
Right.
He's saying this is what my model, based on all this data, is telling me.
Right.
So where does that leave us?
Well, I think...
if this model exists, it has this, pretty impressive track record.
Right.
Does it change how we approach elections?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It really is, and it raises all these other questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you know the likely outcome, at least according to this model, does it make you more or less inclined to vote?
Right. Do you become complacent, like my vote doesn't matter, or does it, like, light a fire under you?
Right.
To be like, no, I'm going to defy the odds.
Exactly. And I think it just highlights the importance of informed action.
Yeah.
Knowing about models like Lichtman's
Right.
isn't about being like a passive observer of, this preordained political fate or whatever.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces at play, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing the patterns
Right.
and then deciding, okay, well, how do I want to participate?
Right. Because as much as we love a good prediction,
Totally.
there's always that
wild card.
wild card,
That X factor.
that could throw the whole thing off.
Of course, of course. And that unpredictability is part of what makes elections so captivating, right?
It's like watching a game where you think you know who's going to win,
Right.
but you just can't tear your eyes away because that upset could happen.
Totally.
It reminds me of that quote, like, never tell me
the odds.
the odds. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Sometimes it's more exciting too. Like, embrace the unknown.
Of course. And, even Han Solo needed a little help from the Force.
Every now and then. Right, exactly. So knowing the patterns can actually make those twists and turns even more exciting, right?
Absolutely.
So as we head into this next election cycle, armed with all these insights from Allan Lichtman and his 13 keys.
13 keys.
Remember, it's not just about who wins or loses, right?
Doers in that.
It's about understanding these forces that are shaping our, political landscape.
Right.
Engaging in these discussions.
Yes.
And maybe even proving the model's wrong every once in a while, right?
That's what makes history so fascinating.
That's the beauty of it.
The push and pull between the predictable and then something totally new.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We explored the history, the methodology, the implications of election prediction.
Yeah.
Hopefully you found it insightful.
I think so.
And maybe even a little bit mind-blowing. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe it'll inspire you to come up with your own keys.
Right, your own set of keys.
For predicting, the future.
Whether it's the elections.
Yeah.
Or what's for dinner tonight.
Exactly.
Until next time, keep those thinking caps on.
Yes.
And happy predicting.